Good day and welcome again to another Working for You program. I am Les Roy Williams. Thank you very much for joining us for our program today. As usual, your company is appreciated from week to week. Today, we are going to be having a discussion on developing a national quality policy to improve the national quality infrastructure here in St. Kitts and Nevis. And we have a lot of distinguished persons on the panel today. Some are in studio and some will join us via internet. But let me introduce the panel. First, I have the Honorable Wendy Phipps, who is the Minister of International Trade, Industry, Commerce, Consumer Affairs, and Labor. Then I have Mr. Stuart Laplace, who is the Director of the St. Kitts and Nevis Bureau of Standards. Joining us online, we have Mr. Derek Omar, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the CARICOM Regional Organization for Standards and Quality, what is referred to as CROSQ. And then we have Dr. Ulrich Harms Lidke, who is an economist and consultant. And then we have Miss Julie Ann Lauder, who is the manager and owner of JAL Training and Consultancy Services. Happy to have all of you on our program today. I would like to begin with asking the Honorable Minister, Honorable Wendy Phipps, responsible for the Bureau of Standards here in St. Kitts, to give us an overview in terms of what is the national quality policy and why is it important.
Thank you so much, Lesroy. And first of all, I have to say thank you for allowing our team from the ministry to be part of today's edition of Working for You. Today actually serves as an interim culmination of a project that would have been started in April of 2021, whereby the government of St. Kitts and Nevis would have embarked on a policy project to develop a quality infrastructure for St. Kitts and Nevis. What do we mean by this? It means that the way in which we conduct ourselves in terms of business, in terms of production, as for example in manufacturing, in terms of how we govern ourselves in general, in terms of how we produce goods and services, that we do so with a mindset and the hallmark and the benchmarks of quality. So the project would have started, as I indicated, in April of 2021 under the leadership of Mr. Stuart Laplace, who I have to use this opportunity to congratulate because he has been the driving force behind this as the director of the Bureau of Standards, as well as the metrology lab, chemistry lab, etc. And we would have embarked on the process so that we can, one, fall in line with the requirements of CARICOM. Having been a signatory to the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, we are also agreeing to all of the terms and conditions of the CSME, the CARICOM Single Market and Economy, which permits the freedom of movement of goods and services across the member state, labor, capital, etc. So every single CARICOM member state, by extension, is asked to ensure that a national quality infrastructure is in place in their territory. What would power that infrastructure would be agencies such as CROSQ as our regional umbrella group, and in the case of St. Kitts and Nevis, our own Bureau of Standards, which would be the national focal point for CROSQ. So when we began this project in April of 2021, we were in fact indicating to the public, to our existing trading partners, and to the rest of the world that St. Kitts and Nevis, like every other country, is serious about ensuring that we present to the people of our country top quality goods and services, that those that we export, those that we import, we are making sure that what we take from other jurisdictions who are our trading partners are also of an equally high standard. We recognize over the years, as we would have followed the development of the WTO, and even prior to that, that you would hear terms like dumping, where jurisdictions that had greater advantages when it came to manufacturing goods because they had access to raw materials or they had electricity at low cost, would produce goods at one standard for their domestic consumption, and then when they want to export to who they consider the third world, that we take what they provide. So a standard and quality infrastructure brings an end to that and puts safeguards in place to prevent that from happening at the same time. So basically, when we look at a quality infrastructure, therefore, we are looking at the necessary inputs in terms of economic growth. We want to have lower prices. We also want to have consumer protection and consumer empowerment too, because it's their money and they have the right to use their earnings to purchase goods and services at a high standards so that they can remain healthy and they can remain safe. And then at the same time, it has an overarching objective in terms of improving our national competitiveness, because obviously we are competing not just with the region but the rest of the world in terms of goods and services, and competition, of course, which drives everything, is based on price, it's based on timing, it's based on placement in the market, and the quality, packaging, a whole host of issues that go into what we call national competitiveness. And of course, not to be diminished, is our own labor input by the high quality, trainable labor staff that we have that can produce these goods and services for domestic consumption as well as for export. So that is why we're here. So the Ministry of Trade would have entered into an arrangement with Meso Partner, and they are represented here on this particular edition of Working for You, and they would have provided guidance for us. They would have led the process in terms of concept development to the actual outpouring of the inputs that we would have garnered in terms of the consultative approach, because one thing we should state from the outset, and you will hear that throughout the program, this quality infrastructure cannot happen and cannot be a success with government driving it alone. It has to be government, it has to be the private sector, it has to be consumers who set the standards for the type of quality of goods and services they demand and are willing to pay for. So that is what is guiding the process. So this document is now ready. And of course, it works in tandem with the legislative infrastructure in the country. So what do I mean by that? For example, we had a Standards Act that would have been passed around 1999. That act is now about to be replaced by the new act that was passed on the 10th of November, which is the Standards and Quality Act for St. Kitts and Nevis. So that would guide that process. So I will end what I have to say at this point so that we can then hear Mr. Laplace's more technical input into the process, and then we can hear from the consultants as well as from CROSQ as to their role in the entire process and how it works together to give us the wholesome output of a quality infrastructure throughout CARICOM.
Thank you, Minister Phipps, for that very in-depth overview. From the Bureau's perspective, we are getting our affairs in order as well. We are trying to get some of our labs accredited in the first instance. As a matter of fact, I think we should have 2 of our labs ready by September of this year, and then we would move into the areas of metrology and water analysis, etc. in the years to come, or maybe even next year if we're lucky. So having a policy is one thing, but having the infrastructure that is driven by the policy is another. And as the Minister alluded to, we need the support of every arm of government as well as the private sector. Everybody who's involved in trading, whether it's services or goods, need to be on board. We are already working behind the scenes with some agencies in terms of developing some standards for the institution. We would have engaged the building board. We've been looking at the building code standard. We also assist in tourism with developing a transport standard. So there's a lot of work going in behind the scenes that would make this national infrastructure a reality. So it's a living document, it's a working document, so we have to basically take away from time to time. There's some costing associated with some ministries that would have to change some of the inputs or the throughputs that they would have in the institutions to make this run like a well-oiled machine. This is not the first. I think we're actually the last island in CARICOM to implement the national quality policy for infrastructure. So we are gathering a lot of knowledge and input from persons who have come before us and looking at a lot of the best practices, etc., moving forward. So we will get into more as we move along in the discussion, but I would end there for now.
Right. Thank you, Stuart. And we have 3 persons who have joined us online, as I mentioned in my introduction, and I would like those who have joined us to know something about them. Mr. Derek Omar is the Chief Executive Officer for the CARICOM Regional Organization for Standards and Quality, what is known as CROSQ, headquartered in Barbados. CROSQ is a regional quality infrastructure development institution founded by 15 member states of the Caribbean community, what is known as CARICOM. Mr. Omar is focusing on modernizing and accelerating the preparation, adoption, and application of regional standards, metrology, accreditation, and conformity assessment systems to increase trade, boost industrial efficiency and effectiveness, advance a quality-conscious culture among citizens, and further the cause of the CARICOM single market and economy, what is known as CSME. He was the past chief executive of the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards and the past director of Export TT, Occupational Safety and Health Agency in Trinidad and Tobago, and COPANT, Pan American Standards Organization, and ASTM International in the United States of America. Dr. Ulrich Harms Lidke holds a doctorate in economics and political science with many years of consultancy experience in the Caribbean and worldwide. As a partner in the consulting firm Mesopartner, he has advised governments of various countries to develop national quality policies. For example, in the Caribbean, he was involved in developing the national quality policies of Trinidad and Tobago, Antigua and Barbuda, Grenada, Suriname, and currently St. Kitts and Nevis. Dr. Harms Lidke is the author of the Global Quality Structure Index and the Quality Infrastructure for Development blog. Miss Julie Lauder is the manager and owner of JAL, Training and Consultancy Services, a freelance consultant whose main area of work is agriculture and food safety. With over 20 years of experience, she has worked in many Caribbean countries, facilitating work on national dialogue, forum, and quality infrastructure in agriculture, agro-processing, and tourism for projects coordinated by CROSQ and funded by the Caribbean Development Bank. She is a technical lead of the team led by Mesopartner consulting firm, currently developing the national quality policy in St. Kitts and Nevis. She also worked with the team to develop national quality policies for Trinidad and Tobago, Antigua and Barbuda, Grenada, and the Grenadines. So that's our 3 distinguished panelists who have joined us online. Now, Mr. Omar, CROSQ's role, could you tell us what is CROSQ's role in the 11th EDF project? Can you give us a project background and some of the countries that are benefiting? He's muted. You have nothing for him. We cannot hear you.
Looking at this screen, might have to call him direct. Your mic is muted. Your mic is muted.
No, it's not. No, it hasn't fixed it.
It hasn't fixed it. Okay, we will come back to Mr. Omar. We had some technical difficulty there, but we will get his input later. Now, Mesa Partner is a team that works in the Caribbean region. Could you tell us a little bit about the team and the experience with other national quality policies? And I would invite Ms. Julie Ann Lauder to speak to us on that.
Hi, good day, afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to be here, and I hope I can represent the team well. I will also give Ulrich a chance to come in as well and give you a little more about MISO Partner. But the team of us who are working on the quality policies for St. Kitts and Nevis is comprised of 8 persons. I'm the technical head, Julian Loda, and then you have Dr. Ulrich Harms-Leike as the overall head of the team. And we are also supported by Mr. Raman Madridan. He's our legal consultant on the team. We are also supported by Mrs. Annette Madapa. She is our metrologist on the team. And additionally, we have Dr. Tamu Brown from St. Kitts, our local consultant on the ground there. And also we have some support from Juan Ortiguez, our analyst, data analyst, who is based in Colombia, and Miss Anne Sarah Ranki soon, sorry. She's a Trinidadian student who is currently studying in Italy. And that comprises the team who has worked over the past almost year or so to put together the national quality policy for St. Kitts and Nevis. And a few members of this team have worked together on developing the policies mentioned before in Antigua and Barbuda, Grenada, and the Grenadines, Trinidad and Tobago, as well as St. Kitts and Nevis now. I will let Dr. Harms-Leike just speak quickly about the MISO Partner Consulting firm itself, which is a bit larger than this team that's working in St. Kitts.
Yes, thank you, Julianne, and welcome to everybody in St. Kitts and Nevis, especially to Ms. Honorable Wendy Phipps from the Ministry of International Trade and Consumer Affairs, and thank you also for having us here. Yes, MISO Partner is a small, we call it a micro enterprise, but a globalized micro enterprise. We are 5 partners spread all over the globe and working on these specific topics like quality infrastructure. And quality infrastructure probably is also important to explain. This is not so much about the infrastructure in the country, it's about the quality of goods and services, and at the end of the well-being of the people. Talking about the team, we are coming from different country backgrounds. As we heard, we have Petra Tamu-Brown from St. Kitts and Nevis, Julian Lauda from Antigua and Barbuda, two Caribbean colleagues, also Sarah Ann Rakamisoon from Trinidad. Then we have colleagues from Colombia, Argentina, and myself from Germany. Therefore, we bring in the Caribbean perspective and knowledge, and at the same time also the global world view. And what I wanted to share is also that quality infrastructure work on this policy was particular because the others we did in place and visited the countries. This time, because of COVID, we were not able to go, and therefore it was quite a challenge, but also huge opportunity to work virtually and design with the colleagues from St. Kitts and Nevis this policy online, and also have all the stakeholder gatherings with the different economic sectors of your economy online. And therefore we are really happy that we made it and that we could hand over this national quality policy document to your government and to the economic and consumer stakeholders. Thank you.
Right. Dr. Lidke, what do you think are some of the greatest benefits of having a national quality policy?
Yes, I think there are several benefits having this kind of policy. First of all, you are aligned with good practices in the Caribbean and worldwide. As the Minister Phipps already told, you're a member of the World Trade Organization, and you are committed to comply with certain rules, which help your companies to export when we're thinking, for example, of your light manufacturing sectors. Without meeting quality standards, you cannot participate and export these goods. But at the same time, also to protect your consumers, that they get quality goods also imported. And probably the quality policy will expand also the possibilities for your sectors to export and relate to more with higher requirements, markets with higher requirements. For example, in the fish exports industry, when you want to export to countries like Martinique and Guadeloupe, which are part of the European Union and which have very high standards. Therefore, I think there are several advantages. And at the end, the quality infrastructure is the backbone of good living, because when you have safe and high quality goods, the people feel well and get also the products what they want and what they need.
Doctor, now Stuart, the process, could you speak a bit to the process to develop the national quality policy for St. Kitts and Nevis? I know that the minister said, you know, what it is, but what has been the process that has gone into it?
Well, I could take it from the top. It started with CROSQ. First of all, we would have expressed our interest to them to be a part of it. They then seek funding through the 11 EDF to have that facilitated for us. Then when we started the process, we had a rubric designed for a multiplicity of consultants, and MISO Partners came out the one with the top marks. So we moved forward. Then we started to engage local stakeholders on the ground. We had a series of workshops and meetings, understand what is going on within the various sectors. Then we had some regional meetings with some of those entities that would have had a national quality policy developed for them prior, and We had St. Lucia, I think it was, Trinidad, Antigua, quite a few islands. And we were learning from their industries in terms of where they were, what changes they would have made to improve their physical infrastructure. We learned about the effects of COVID, how it hampered or delayed some of this development. We also went into to look at some of the best practices that we can take from those standard ways of developing theirs on the ground in terms of their dynamic. And then we would have had a few drafts coming out of developing the policy. We looked at it, go back and forth, send it out to stakeholders for comments, etc. And then we've completed a final draft, and here we are now. So that is it in a nutshell in terms of how the process was done. So it was consultative here. We had tourism, transport, we had small business, we had the light manufacturing, we had agriculture and fisheries. We had quite a few stakeholders involved in the development of this NQP.
Right, we're trying to see if Mr. Omar is ready, and he can tell us in terms of CROSQ's role in the 11th EDF project by giving us a background of the project and some of the countries that are benefiting. Mr. Omar.
Thanks very much, sir. Are you hearing me now? Mr. Williams? Testing, testing.
We are hearing you now.
Oh, great. Thanks. So, CROSQ is the CARICOM Regional Organization for Standards and Quality. It is owned by the 50 Bureaus of Standards in the region, and the 15 Chief Executive Officers sit on the Board of Directors of CROSQ. CROSQ's role is to seek project resources from international and regional donor committees, structure that into quality infrastructure development projects, and then execute that through the member states' national bureaus of standards. In this way, we bring additional resources and systems and work methods to the 15 bureaus of standards in the region that ordinarily they will not be able to access by themselves as a single entity. And that's the value that CROSQ could add, in that it's a cooperative arrangement of the bureaus working together to partner with international and other regional agencies to structure projects that can be executed in all the member states in different ways and according to their needs. So right now, CDB has used CROSQ as the project manager to implement a national quality policy in St. Kitts and help with the metrology development or measurement development of their laboratory, as well as on the same project to develop the metrology laboratories of Dominica and Barbados. And we're very glad to play a facilitative role, not only as a project manager for those resources to help those 3 member states bureaus of standards, but also to help in the quality infrastructure development of the countries. So that's the role we currently play. And in respect of the national quality policy in particular, in regards of St. Kitts, in 2018, CROSQ developed a regional quality infrastructure development policy that was passed at the Council of Trade and Economic Development in 2018, which comprises all the ministers of trade in the region. And they passed this regional quality infrastructure development policy that they hoped that member states would adapt or adopt in their own way to guide the national quality infrastructure development in their countries. Since 2018, we have managed to develop a number of projects with different development partners, and St. Kitts and Nevis is the 12th of the 15 member states to now nationalize this regional CARICOM policy for the development of quality infrastructure. So this is definitely one CARICOM policy that has got implemented, and we just have 3 more member states to go. And in development of this national quality policy, MISO partner has partnered with us in about 4 or 5 member states now to nationalize this regional policy. And that's a wonderful achievement by MISO partners, because in each country, they really help to customize the principles and the tenets and the recommendations in the regional quality policy. So we have a nice consistency running across a number of member states. And this national quality policy that is built out of the regional quality policy approved by CARICOM gives clear direction as to how the Ministry of International Trade and the Bureau of Standards can further work with quality infrastructure institutions to develop and grow the whole elements of standards in the country and the use of standards to facilitate trade and imports. The national quality policy also guides the development of your measurement infrastructure, pressure, temperature, mass, weight, those kinds of things. It sets calibration standards and verification standards and legal standards for that. And your national quality policy also guides the Bureau and the Ministry as to how to inspect, test, and certify goods and services against quality standards when they are produced in your country or used in your country. And finally, the national quality policy will also help to educate a wide range of stakeholders as to what's the important role of the Bureau of Standards in helping to promote quality, not only as an enabling tool for businesses, but also as a strategic tool for businesses in your country, because quality is not only a production process issue, but it's also a business strategy in its own right, helping to differentiate your products and services at the end of the day for competitive value added to the end customer. So I've sought to give you an overview as to what CROSQ is in terms of an agglomeration of the working of the 15 bureaus of standards, and help you see that CROSQ really tries to get regional projects that no single bureau could get by themselves, and then we implement that through the various bureaus of standards. And in respect of introducing or working or developing the CARICOM approved regional quality policy, we now have 12 member states, including St. Kitts, nationalizing that policy for quality infrastructure development. And that's quite an achievement of a CARICOM policy, we think. And we thank MISO partners for helping us on at least 5 of those projects so far. Thank you.
Mr. Omar, how is the regional quality policy document really guiding these national quality policies?
The regional quality policy sets a consensus-driven vision as to what is the definition of quality, or what is the definition of quality infrastructure tools to help the public sector and the businesses promote quality in their country, and therefore develop a quality-conscious culture in the public sector, civil society, and in businesses. So we have a harmonized vision now in the region as to what is quality infrastructure, and we have that cascaded into common objectives of how to achieve that quality. We have also in the regional policy identified 4 mechanisms to achieve those objectives and the vision. And one of those measures deals with how can we mobilize private sector to build quality more into their systems and their products. Another measure deals with how can we encourage the public sector to create an enabling environment for quality to grow in businesses, but also for the public sector, how can they introduce quality infrastructure components so that you get better services. The third mechanism for achieving the objectives that was consensus-driven was a series of principles and practices of how we could grow and develop the bureaus of standards in each member state so that they could produce and supply the quality infrastructure tools required for the public sector and the private sector. And the last important measure in the regional quality policy dealt with how we can develop quality professionals like Julian, Mr. Laplace and his team, and how we could share those people regionally with the knowledge that is being built up. So the regional quality policy has a collective and consensus-driven vision, objectives, and measures as to how to grow and develop quality infrastructure in any member states in terms of principles and practices. So it brings a harmonization of belief and thought processes how to do that. Then each member state takes this regional policy and it applies it into formal processes and practices that then gets logged into your national quality policy. So your national quality policy is about processes and practices that brings the principles of the regional quality policy to life. And if everybody follows this common regional quality infrastructure principles and they bring it to life in their national quality policies, then you have an implementable CARICOM policy, and which is really good. And now we have 12 member states bringing into being the principles commonly agreed to about quality and quality infrastructure development in the region.
Dr. Lidke, what have been some of the challenges that you have faced in helping countries in developing their national quality policies?
First of all, the term of quality infrastructure sounds not familiar to the everyday consumer. Therefore, we always have to explain what this is all about, and also to the companies. Sensitization about the relevance and the contribution of standards, measurement science, testing, inspection, calibration. All these technical aspects are very important that the people of the country and especially the business sectors sees this advantage. And it's always important to clarify that these requirements are not only a cost or burden, they are also an opportunity for the company to conquer new markets and also to innovate. And getting this message out is not only a challenge for the policy development, also it's a day-to-day challenge for your Bureau of Standards and also for your Ministry of Trade. Therefore, this is one main challenge to spread the word and to explain that quality is an investment and you will get a payback on that. And the second aspect, looking to a federation of a small island state like St. Kitts and Nevis, I think there is a challenge to adapt these infrastructure, what you find in every nation, every country, to the reality of a small developmental island state. Because you don't need to have all services established in the country, but you need to have a hub information point where you can get the information where to get the best services. Some are provided by the Bureau in the country or by other operators, by others abroad. For example, when you want to have a laboratory test, you have to check if this laboratory test is accredited, and the Bureau of Standards is an accreditation focal point and can inform the business people about high quality service provider in this area. I think these are the two challenges. Spread the word about quality infrastructure and the advantages, and the second is to adapt these quality infrastructure to the reality of a small island state.
Thank you so much. Now, either minister or the director can explain to us what are some of the main elements of the national quality policy. Yes,
So Laplace.
a summary of what is in it.
And I would also ask that Ms. Lauder is also allowed to interface on it.
Okay, as it relates to some of the, as you would say, the meats of the matter, as it relates to the NQP, is how we look at certain actions or services that are currently happening on the ground here in St. Kitts. So let me give you an example. Looking at our local fisheries, for instance, as Dr. Lidke had pointed out, there are some very stringent measures to export to places like the EU, and of course Guadeloupe and St. Martin is part of the EU. So having said that, there are some checks and balances that needs to be in place in order to access those markets, and that is where the infrastructure development comes in now. So what we have been doing is that we would have done an evaluation of the fisheries here in St. Kitts, and we are looking at getting them HACCP certified. And in doing that, it would allow them to access some of these markets that have these high standards. Currently, there are no procedures in place in terms of from the catch all the way to the sale in terms of documentation, so we are trying to assist with that. Equally important is the abattoir. It is the only place in St. Kitts and Nevis that is allowed to butcher, as we would say, and of course you have to also ensure that that meat is of a high quality. Even though we know it is, you still need documentation to prove that. The proof is in the pudding with the traceability. So in doing that, we are also trying to get the abattoir certified to HACCP. Now this is across the board in both St. Kitts and Nevis, so this is not just for St. Kitts alone, it's also for Nevis because we are a federal entity, so we move in both instances. When we move a step further and we look at something like transportation, how do we define what is a taxi, what is a Uber, what is a passenger bus, what is a general transport vehicle, what are the taxes associated, what are the services associated, etc. Now, once you can put definitive roles and assignment on a lot of these specific articles, then it's a lot easier for you to move through and understand what exactly are you trying to accomplish in terms of defining A from B, right? Additionally, you also have to look at the light manufacturing. Of course, we have our industrial site. It's under the purview of international trade as well, is well placed. And entities like those, of course, they are linked to other entities in Europe and the United States. And they also have accreditation values as well as documentation that has to be in place on both the mother company as well as the ones here. So the Bureau of Standards' role is to ensure that we can assist with services like those. That is one of the reasons why we are developing, as Mr. Omar pointed out, that we're developing the metrology lab here up to our F1 class. And that means that we will be able to calibrate our own weights that we're using to verify the scales in the supermarket, the airports, the way bridges, etc. And that gives that level of confidence and assurity that that standard is there. You also look at agriculture. We are now looking at adopting somewhere around 50 or 60 standards directly related to fruits and vegetables in terms of how they're handled, how they're packaged, etc. Based on those codex formulations, the way food is packaged determines the grades. It also determines the sale, and as the Honorable Minister pointed out, you keep certain things from off the shelf that normally would be there, attracting a higher price when it should not be. You should be paying for quality and not just what is there. So the consumers basically would be driving this in determining what we're going to buy or what we're going to spend our money on, from looking at the competitive rates across the board in terms of who has the highest quality, who have the best price, etc., etc. Tourism, one of our main driving forces here in St. Kitts in terms of economic up until recently, you know, COVID, etc. Now we would have looked at some standards for tourism as well in terms of developing the operations on the beach. So we would have adopted a standard for beaching and yachts in terms of how they operate in the harbors, etc. And this is very important because to drive economic development, persons have to know that we have the infrastructure in order to accommodate. So if you want to accommodate certain size and classes of yachts, there's certain amenities that are expected in port that should be in place in terms of the checks on the water. Some of those standards for the yachts would be to do microbial checks on things like Legionella, to the water quality for things like arsenic, mercury, etc. And that is important to have in place as a service if you are trying to attract those type of clientele. If you're looking at export, as I mentioned with the Codex standards, you have to look at the quality of the fruits. How are they packaged? How are they harvested? How are they stored? You can't just say, oh, I have my bananas and they look good, so let me send them to the Dominican Republic or the United States, etc. You have to make sure that you are aligned with a particular standard that goes on your certificate of analysis for export. So you have that added value and quality. Now, because we're inside the network of CROSQ, we also have the advantage of reaching out to other bureaus of standards for assistance. So we would have reached out to BSJ, which is Bureau of Standards Jamaica. They would have put us on to JANAC, who is the lead accreditation agency in the Caribbean. And of course, instead of getting one of those international agencies involved at a high penny, we would have gotten a very affordable rate from JANAC to do the same work as one of those larger international firms. Now, on the heels of that, we have to also get our house, so to speak, in order if we are trying to encourage others to do so. And that's one of the reasons why we're developing a metrology lab to be accredited. We are also looking at developing chemistry and air quality as well to be accredited. Now, once we have those in place, then you have a greater buy-in in terms of the services we offer, and we can also encourage other labs like JNF, some of the local labs as well, the hospital in Nevis, the lab at Alexandria as well, to get to that level or that standard, so you could have that assurance in terms of the quality, the timely results, in terms of the turnaround, as well as the capabilities. So there's a lot of things that has to go on behind the scene to fuel that, but it starts with the Bureau helping the other agencies to get to where they need to be in order to deliver that service and be competitive.
Ms. Lauder?
Yes, so Mr. Laplace would have given you the meat of the matter, as he called it, in terms of some of the key sectors that we focused on in the development of the national quality policy. And of course, these sectors were not developed by us, but in consultation with our stakeholders, in review of certain government documents like the budget, and some of the other policy documents that exist for St. Kitts and Nevis. This is what guides us to picking those three sectors for focus, as Mr. Laplace just outlined. In terms of the other components of the policy itself, we have 4 main areas, which falls on the governance and institutional building. Another area which looked at legislative reform and policy integration. We had another area looking at physical infrastructure development, capacity building, and organizational strengthening. So Mr. Laplace made mention of the development of the metrology lab, and of course, in order to provide better services and good quality services, you need the physical infrastructure to do that. And so St. Kitts and Nevis is well on the way with building their capacity and being able to offer better services in the area of metrology, and other areas will soon follow. We also looked at the promotion of a quality conscious and proactive environment to get everybody on board. And the minister spoke earlier about providing quality goods and services for the citizens of the Federation. But the consumers also have to have an appreciation and a demand for quality so that the service providers of goods and services will then in turn make sure that they provide good quality goods and services. So you have to kind of hold them to the fire. And the creation of a quality culture in St. Kitts and Nevis is a long-term goal. It takes some time to develop and cultivate an appreciation for quality among the economic actors and for the consumers as well, and then for all to adjust their behavior accordingly. And so envision in the quality policy is a whole section that deals with the promotion of quality conscious and proactive environment so that in a few years we can take the citizens of the Federation from where they are now to a more advanced appreciation of the need for quality and quality infrastructure services. And along that path, they should develop a quality culture, which will then be the demand-driven aspect of the economic process that will keep those quality infrastructure institutions on their toes and have them widen and deepen their services provided. And mention was made of accreditation. It's a very expensive process, but it's one of those things that once you get there, nobody will question your goods and services once you have them accredited. So the path to quality is a long path, it's an expensive path, but it's worth the while because of the economic benefits to the businesses that exist in the country and the consumers that are living in the country as well. So it's a win-win situation all around. And of course, the government benefits as the economy grows, the consumers benefit, the government benefits, because more goods and services come into circulation, and they, of course, can reap more in their taxes. The final chapter of the quality policy looks at operationalization of the national quality policy. In this, we propose a few structures that will govern how the quality policy will be implemented and rolled out. So in the initial stages of the project, we were working together with a project steering committee, together with the Bureau, of course. And this project steering committee, we propose be converted to a national quality council. And we envision that this National Quality Council be a high order quality council that could be chaired by the Minister of International Trade sitting here, or her designate, of course. And we also propose that the co-chair of this council be the Chamber of Commerce, alternating between the St. Kitts and the Nevis chapter, so that you have a nice private-public sector partnership in the implementation and governance of the quality policy. And of course, a small implementation unit headed by maybe one person, but supported by the Bureau and the Ministry of International Trade again, to see to the day-to-day implementation and rollout of the activities of the quality policy. Because as Ulrich said, there's no point in creating a document and have it sit there. The document has to be actioned, and it's also a dynamic document. So this committee will hopefully every 2 years at least, or sooner if the needs arise, look to develop, refresh, update, revise the documents as needed, so that they keep in tandem with the movement of the country. They don't become obsolete, but they actually become a light or beacon leading the way towards quality for the Federation. And of course, all of this take a little bit of money. And so we have proposed a budget, but we're not leaving the country in the lurch. We have proposed in the budget that the government plays a little part, maybe provided 20% or so. The private sector investment, 1%. And then the country could seek donor funding up to 79%. to fund some of the activities. Some of the activities we have outlined in the implementation plan are already in progress, with funding from some agencies, but supplemental to those and targeting new areas, we propose this funding mix that can help the country meet its goal and, as I said, progress on the path to greater quality policy, to greater quality with the quality policy.
Okay, Ms. Lauder, thank you very much. Now, Minister Phipps, of course, Ms. Lauder said quite a mouthful. And policies, sometimes the hardest part of the policies implementation and the communication plan. She spoke about, how to get this across to the people so that the people can understand and so on. What communication plan is there?
Okay, Ms. Laudet is so correct in what she has said, because so often, Lesroy, in the past, as a government, as a private sector, as civil society, we are not short of getting access to funding, access to technical assistance for capacity building, knowledge transfer, and after all of the effort has been expended, this document sits there and nothing gets done with it. In this particular case, we do not have the luxury of inertia. We live in an environment that is changing. St. Kitts and Nevis might be a small island developing state, but our people have high standards and high tastes in terms of what they require. The growth, for example, that we would have seen in terms of internet shopping, if you were to go outside ZIZ Studio and poll 10 people and ask them, how many of you know about Amazon? How many of you know about eBay? I'm quite certain you would find at least maybe 8 out of 10 people already know what those are because they purchase products from them. And of course, in the purchasing of the products, they would have also looked at our local markets to see if those products are here, at what kind of quality and what kind of price, how soon will they get it, what kind of after-sale service is there. Granted, yes, if we're going to use the example of internet shopping, after-sale service becomes a bit of a challenge because once the good lands here, either through the airport, seaport, or one of your drop shipping companies that you might use, such as eZone or some of the others, those fast shipping US mailbox services, when the good gets here, what do you have as a recourse? So that becomes a little more delicate and a little more hairy in terms of after-sale services and consumer protection.
Especially in terms of electronics.
Exactly,
like that.
And that is why for agents such as eZone, I respect that they now have this offer of a white glove, they call it a white glove treatment, where you pay extra, they handle the goods like as if it's a Russian egg, and they bring it in, they handle it delicately, they call you in, they turn it on in your presence to ensure that this is the quality in which you received it, instead of having to wait until you take it home. So that's their effort in ensuring that type of consumer empowerment, but that could only take you so far. Now, when we speak of a quality infrastructure, Lesroy, as you're rightly placing it, we have to break it down in language that the public understands, because we are doing this for them, we are doing this for us. When we do it for them, it's a matter that we are doing it so that they get the best quality goods and services there are, whether they are produced locally or they're imported into the country. When we are doing it for us, it's from the other vantage point that we are now saying, hey, rest of the world, we are ready to do business with you. We have consultants here who can do this type of work in your jurisdiction. We have goods that we would like to export, and whether it's the European market or the US market, we are knowledgeable of what the trading rules are, the rules of engagement. We understand what we have to do in terms of product testing, packaging, labeling, nutrition facts, list of allergies, so that when we are ready for export, there are no technical barriers that will present themselves to trade. That will say at the border in the US, well, look, the hot sauce that Mr. Bristol makes in St. Kitts can't come in here because there's no barcode, there's no list of ingredients, it doesn't have a batch number, it doesn't say when it was produced or when it will expire. And by the way, nobody says whether or not it was manufactured in a plant that makes nuts, because some of our public in the US, as here, are persons who might go into anaphylaxis, some sort of adverse allergic reaction if they eat anything with peanuts in it or whatever might be the case. So all these things have to be factored in. So it cuts both ways. The other thing that we're looking at, and I'm mindful of this as I was debating the bill on the 10th of November for the Standards and Quality Act to be passed, and it has to do with the way in which we receive goods here, even in St. Kitts and Nevis, because I think the pandemic, and even before that, experiences such of that would have risen up a spirit of self-determination in our people, where they no longer just want to have a job when they leave school, to work for someone else, but they want to be an entrepreneur. So let's say, for example, you have a young lady, a young man, or a group of young people who want to join to form a business, and they want to sell high-end clothing. And they want to be into their Ferragamo bags, they want to have Fendi, they want to have other Versace gowns or whatever. And it's one thing to say you're selling these goods and you're going to tell some young person in St. Kitts who is fashion-minded that, look, if you want to buy this, it's going to cost you 500 US, 1,000 EC, whatever the case might be. But then what proof does that young person in St. Kitts with that kind of discriminating fashion sense have to prove to them that it is really a Versace gown or a Fendi bag, and that it didn't fall off the back of a truck somewhere near to the New York Harbor and found its way into St. Kitts and Nevis? So that's where we come in, because we then would be putting ourselves to the test, and we put exporters to the test too, so that before these goods leave our port, we know what it is we are authorizing for sale in St. Kitts and Nevis. So it's meant to create a more empowered consumer, a more educated consumer. The same thing goes for services. Now, services is an area that the Ministry of Trade has still as a work in progress. I know my days, even going back to the private sector when I was at the Chamber of Commerce, we would have begun talking about a coalition of service industries. And this body of consultants and professionals would be the ones abiding by certain international standards, helping to set our own standards. We actually would have had, even back then, a draft management consultants bill. And that too is something that we will be pursuing to a natural conclusion, because, for example, Lesroy, if you have a company, like let's say Mr. Laplace is going into aquaculture, and he wants to make sure that he has training so that when he hires staff, a group of young people, that they know exactly what it is to deal with spawning, what it is to deal with having these fish grow in a separate controlled environment where you don't want certain bacteria that would compromise the fish stock and so forth. How is Mr. Laplace going to be sure that when he puts out a call for proposal to a consultant to come in to work with him with that aquaculture project, that the consultant who is going to bid on his project is going to be someone worth their salt? So that's where we come in again with services, because then we are following those Caribbean standards. And while we are on that note, I know that there's a Caribbean agency that the CICMC that already exists regionally that we can tap into. We actually have Kittitians and Nevisians who would have a basic certification in that type of consultancy approach, and that is what we are getting at. So that when people pay for goods, when they pay for services, you recognize that they spend good money. It's about trust, building trust in a product, in a service, and it has to live up to its name, but that we want to be the facilitation agency that ensures that what is exchanged in the business environment, be it goods or services, is exactly what it says it is, and then you pay for it based on what market forces dictate as the price that the market can carry.
Minister, I'm happy that you mentioned, because while on one hand we expect the best quality in terms of goods and services that are imported, for example, we also want to provide the best goods and services that are exported.
Exactly.
And so therefore, so that we are known as a country with a high standard of our goods and services going out into the regional market or the international market. And that markets us as a country you know, of a high standard of producing.
Yes, Leswa, and I'm glad you said that, because, for example, We already are a jurisdiction, exporting jurisdiction with high quality goods for export. Take, for example, our manufacturing sector. St. Kitts and Nevis is probably one of a few CARICOM member states left with a viable presence that has been created from the Caribbean Basin Initiative going back to 1980 under Ronald Reagan and regional heads of government, wherein they would have agreed to create offshore manufacturing facilities in the region. They would have provided employment to our citizens. They would have provided training for them, and that these high-quality goods, in our case mostly electronics, would be going back to the U.S. market. We have graduated beyond that now. We are even companies like Harris Servo, because we are part of the Economic Partnership Agreement with the EU, and then after Brexit with the UK. They no longer have to ship goods to the US and then ship to Europe, because they leverage the fact that St. Kitts and Nevis is a signatory to the EPA. So even before EPA existed, Harrow was shipping into the Czech Republic, into Poland, and Czech and other areas like that. And it saves on costs, because of course the goods get national treatment because there is little or no duty that is attracted. But then for those goods to go in, we would have had to be producing them to a high standard here in order to get those exports. And because of that culture of excellence that we have had in terms of manufacturing, electronic exports, St. Kitts and Nevis continues to be the lead exporter in the OECS to goods to the US. And that did not happen overnight, and it didn't happen by accident. It's by repeated patterns of the exercise of high standards in production. And I have to commend our local labor force for that in the manufacturing sector, because it tells us that our people could compete with the best in the world.
They can. Now we'll go to the phone lines with a little bit of time that we have left. We'll continue our discussion, of course. But the numbers to call are 466-2666, 662-8674, 767-4765, and the overseas number is 1-239-645-4500. We await your calls. Right. Now, Stuart mentioned that the document, the National Quality Policy, is a living document, which means it is not set in stone, which means it requires constant revising and evaluation and updating, because in the global environment in which we live is constantly changing. So who is going to monitor? Who is going to govern? You know.
Well, we have a committee in place. We have a steering committee that will be upgraded to the Quality Council, and they would be monitoring the needs. And of course, the Bureau is a place where we just don't get up and implement or enforce things. It has to do with stakeholder buy-in as well as consultation. So if there's a need for us to regulate or introduce something, it has to come to us from the general public, whether private or the public sector. We have to put committees in place to look at the various standards that are out there that can address this. And of course, if there is a situation that arises that puts our national security at risk, our environment at risk, persons' health and safety at risk, of course, then that is one of the only times that we have to put a regulation in place to streamline this level of activity. So for instance, something like bottled water, 95% of our citizens drink bottled water. So of course that is something that has to be regulated, and we have something in place to address that soon. So that is just an example of an instance where regulation is put in place, and that because of health and safety. You have to make sure that, yes, you're getting into the bottling water business, but of course there's a standard by which you need to follow to ensure that health and safety is maintained. Now, when we do something like that, we are also aware of persons importing water. The retailers also import water. So we also have to hold those water that are coming in at the same standard we hold in the local bottlers. And when we do things like that, we have to inform the WTO that this is our intention. We have to put out a call for comments, etc., and a timeline by which it's going to be enforced. So in the world of trade, we're not just working in a silo in terms of saying, okay, we're going to do this and we're not going to consult. We have to basically get all the stakeholders involved when it comes to putting these things in place. So with the NQP, if there are instances that may arise after the development of this one, then we can add to it. If there's things that are no longer an issue and we would have had that streamlined, then it can come out. So we add and take away as we go. We include certain people on the committee as well as exclude as the need arises as well in terms of the expertise and the need. But the committee right now is made up of persons from the wider community from both the private sector and the public sector on both islands. So we have representation from both St. Kitts and Nevis sitting on that committee.
Mm-hmm. If the Bureau of Standards, they would be heavily involved in the implementation of the national quality policy. That means that the staff, they would have to have proper knowledge and intimate knowledge of the policy, mm-hmm. and they will have to have training as well in terms of implementing the policy. What sort of a training do you have in mind for the staff at the Bureau? Because they will have to be trained.
Right, and not just the staff, but the various
regulators.
The regulators would also have to be trained in terms of how do you issue a certificate? What should be on the certificate? Who would be qualified to issue one? What type of knowledge and infrastructure and qualifications would one need to issue a certificate? You cannot just say, I'm the agency to issue the certificate and you go ahead and issue it. There are certain checks and balances that need to be in place. As a matter of fact, some of my staff, both senior and junior, managers as well as the senior technical staff, they are engaged in training currently, and they're looking at ways to determine how we can spot an agency that is doing accreditation if they are linked back to ILAC, which is the International Laboratory Accreditation Center. That will determine whether you are indeed authorized to issue a certification. And when you do that level of traceability, you're able to see when that certification was issued, when it's going to expire, and what scope can you offer that level of accreditation service. And we have staff trained now to look for a lot of that nuances. So if we get any call to investigate a particular agency that is handing out accreditation or certification, we can track that company to see if it was really truly certified and under what scope and who offered that certification. So there are a lot of training that goes into this development as well as the maintenance of this, because this is not a one-off where we're doing it this year and next year and that's going to be the end of it. This is something revolving and continuous, and we have to always be a step ahead, because when it comes to trade, we are the technical arm for the ministry, so we have to also be aware of the stuff that's coming in and the potential of the things that need to leave the country in terms of what markets they could access, what needs to be in place, which companies on the island we can help in terms of boosting their trade value, etc., etc. So we are available for consultation. Persons can come to us and ask us any question about any good services that you want to get into or you already have, to see if there's anything in place to help you get to the next level. So it comes down to consultation and partnership between the private and the public sector. So we are here to be engaged whenever there's the need.
Minister, the funding, I know that Ms. Lauder mentioned 20%,
mm-hmm.
she said was government.
Mm-hmm.
She said 1% I think was it from the people?
I think that's what she's
private-
recommending for the
That-
future.
that is
Private sector,
That is what she's recommending. 1%
Right.
from the private sector, and the bulk of it would come from donor agencies.
Right.
What are some of the donor agencies that we're
I
looking
think
at?
in this particular case, the primary one would be the EU. And of course, we have other avenues for assistance that we can tap into. For example, the International Trade Center, which is a functionary under the WTO, because they do a lot of training throughout the world. Granted, the level of training that we would, or support that we would require here might be different to what a third world country in Africa would require. But nevertheless, if the same African farmers want to export to the rest of the African Union or to Europe, it's the same standards that they will still have to bring themselves up to, that we would have to put our farmers through to access those same markets, because that is the beauty of standardization. That is the beauty of being part of a bigger global trading system that allows you to compete on the same level playing field, and at the same time, even though, as Ms. Lauder would have mentioned, how costly it is to maintain standards, at the end of the day, it's still better for us. And that is why, even from our level, where we have decided, as Mr. Laplace would have told you earlier, to start with our own domestic situation, and he gave examples of perhaps agriculture, the fisheries, and the abattoir. We start there, because if we want to be able to export overseas, we first have to make sure that what we have available is suitable for our own domestic production, and not a case where you send away the best and you leave the scraps to be taken up here by our citizens. It can't work that way. So I think the avenues are there, but we will have to make it national commitment. At the same time, while Ms. Lauder would have indicated some of the possible funding structures that could help to drive this process, what we should also indicate, both Mr. Laplace and I, to you, is that based on the legislative and regulatory infrastructure that must be put in place, some of that would have to be self-financing, because in order for us to give certain certification, etc., there will be nominal fees attached to it, laboratory fees, etc., fees to come up with a conformity assessment. Like, for example, I would appreciate in the time we have left that Mr. Laplace could give a very basic example of tires coming into St. Kitts, because I'm sure we have more than 27,000 vehicles on the ground here, and every one of them must run on tires. But Mr. Laplace, if you could share the example of where we want to take that for the benefit of the public.
Yes, we have well over 100,000 vehicles on the road, not just 27,000. So you have to multiply that by 4.
Exactly.
Yes, so we're looking at implementing a regulation to monitor tires, just to ensure that we are not putting snow tires on the road. And of course, there's a different rubric at play when it comes to maneuvering with snow tires versus all-purpose or tires that are used in tropical and subtropical regions. Of course, the braking and all of that, the tread depths, and the basic use and the maneuvering of the vehicle can be affected. So we going to embark on some training moving forward with the various authorized shops that inspect vehicles, to show them how to look at some of the inspection procedures as it relates to tires. We will also be looking at the tires that are imported into the country as well.
So there's training for customs as well.
Yes, so you'll be able to see what is considered a snow tire and what is not considered
you're so
a snow
correct,
tire.
because some of these tires, sometimes you wonder, they don't last very long
Not
before
only
they
that,
start to...
not only that, Lesroy, even some of the road accidents that we have, we don't know how much of that might be attributed to tires that are inappropriate for our jurisdiction. You know, because there's some school of thought that some of that might be at play. And because some of these countries are eager to dump a snow tire once the winter season is over, because rubber is degradable, you might think that you're making a good deal by paying far less for your basic tire than TDC, Horsford, or CarMax, or wherever you might go to, might charge you for a tire. But then at what risk?
Right.
So these are some of the things that we have to weigh. But herein lies the benefit of having a standard, so that none of these types of tires even come on the market to be sold to the public. So as Ms. Lauder indicated, it might be more costly, but how do you put a price on your own health and safety when it comes to driving in a car from point A to point B with your loved one, children, family, parents on board with you?
Right. I know a lot of what we looked at had to do with goods, agriculture, that what is material. But a lot of times what we need improvement in is the type of services that we offer.
Precisely.
And we are a tourist-based economy right now. And the level of service has to be improved.
That is so true, Lesroy, and that is why even as we
And
continue...
people providing, Minister, their service within that industry as
Exactly.
well must be certified.
That's what I was getting at earlier about the Coalition of Service Industries, and by extension the work that CICMC would have been doing in the past. That's the Barbados-based regional agency that certifies and does training with management consultants. Granted, they're not the only body that can do that, but then I honestly believe if you're going to be serious about consultancy, where people trust you, with sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars being spent on training, recalibration of your business systems, the introduction and investment in technology, you have to be sure that you're getting bang for your buck. And as it is with customer service, yes, even before COVID, we had our challenges. But then I would say that among the major lessons that we would have had being emerging out of COVID has been, let's say, take, for example, the tourism industry, with what Raquel Brown and her team would have been able to do with the travel approved seal. You're on the COVID-19 task force with us, and you understand how that works, because COVID gave us an opportunity to take a long, hard look at ourselves, about what we serve, what we offer for sale to the public, and about having us benchmark and adopt best practices that say, okay, if this jurisdiction is your competition for sea, sun, and sand, what are they doing that you are not doing? Because then, if all of you have the same sun, sea, and sand, there must be some other variables, some other pull factors that are causing a tourist or a family of visitors to decide to come from Scandinavia or to come from other parts of Europe and bypass the US and bypass the attraction and the sexiness and the romance of Paris to come to a small island developing state. What is it? What is the comparative advantage? And therein lies the whole issue with the travel approved seal. So we are on the road there, but we still need to do it against international benchmarks.
Yes.
But the fact that we have to improve our service delivery, that is a given. And we have to start with the government too. Because I think that is a paradigm shift that we lack in St. Kitts and Nevis, where we think the extension of customer service is a private sector thing, when actually government is there to serve the public. So whether it is you're standing in line at the passport office, or you're standing in line up at the Ministry of Health somewhere, or the government laboratory somewhere, it's our people still. They're still customers. They might be patients at the same time, but we have an obligation to render top quality services
in fact,
to
the
them.
government must be offering the best service.
Exactly, the government must be the one setting the standards. But not that you have somebody in front of you and you walk out, okay, I'm the cashier in this particular government department, and 5 to 4 I pack my bag, and you got to come back tomorrow to pay that bill. Well, last time I checked, people don't refuse money, especially for services. But at the same time, we recognize as we improve services that is what builds relationships.
Yes, the culture needs to change.
And we build relationships that way and build more goodwill in the process, because the same people you ill-treat when you offer services are the same people you might meet later down in a private sector entity, and then it just occurred to you, that was the person I was rude to this morning, and now this is the person in another environment. It could be the bank loan officer, and you're the one needing the loan now. Need I say more?
That's correct.
Right, so everything comes down to relationships, but you do that by rendering top quality services, especially quality customer service. That is an expectation, and it's a compulsory requirement.
Good. Now, Mr. Omar, Ms. Lauder, and Dr. Lidke, where do you think we need to go? What are the next steps for a national quality policy within the region? And yeah, where do we need to go? I know that Mr. Omar said that there were 12 countries that had already had national quality policies. CARICOM is a 15-member organization, and so therefore it means that other countries need to come on board. Where do we need to go?
So if I might just go first. The minister said it at the very beginning of the program that the national quality policy is a multi-stakeholder agreement of how to build a quality conscious culture in St. Kitts and Nevis, or rather how to raise it to another level. So the beauty about the national quality policy that was developed is that everybody has a part to play in it to really manifest properly to build that quality conscious culture. And then Mr. Laplace indicated that the way to action that would be to quickly turn the project committee into a national quality council that will guide the implementation of that national quality policy and continue to engage all the stakeholders as mentioned in the policy in the specific roles that were mentioned to make this thing come to fruition. So the first step in implementing the policy is to formalize that National Quality Council. The second step would be to ensure that that National Quality Council encourages those who have responsibilities outlined to live up to them. And thirdly, it would be to follow the roadmap laid out in the implementation plan to find resources to help some of those projects come into being. Because nothing wins better than winning. So there are some really nice prioritized projects to help quality infrastructure grow in St. Kitts, and there are a lot of resources out there to help that. So apart from looking at your national budget, you have opportunities with CDB, the European Union, UNIDO, ITC, the German government, and the German government implementation agencies called GIZ and PTB, and also some other regional institutions such as CROSQ, which is Regional Energy Efficiency, the DEMA, which is the National Disaster Emergency Management Agency, Caribbean Export. All of them have grant funding mechanisms to help bring those projects to life. But it will all start with that National Quality Council, them engaging the stakeholders through the communication plan, and then touch pointing with these institutions that I just named there, both regionally and internationally, to get some of those projects off of the ground. And CROSQ has relationships with all those agencies, so obviously we will be a prime partner with Mr. Laplace to help take this a step forward too. And we actually have a new project coming with UNIDO regionally shortly in the next 2-3 months, where some of those projects will actually get some roots in that UNIDO program. Okay, so it's a 3-step project, and I think it's quite doable, as we have seen in a couple of other member states. Thank you.
Dr. Lidke? Where do we go?
Yes, where do you go? I hope forward. I think with the national quality policy, you have a roadmap to follow. What we put together with the Bureau of Standards are so-called quick win activities for each sectors, for the fishery folks and agriculture, for the light manufacturing, and also for tourism and transport. There are small things you can start with and work on. And I think these quick win activities are very important to foster the relationship between the Bureau and key economic sectors of your country. And by this way, the reality of quality, using quality management systems and quality services will increase. And by this way, you will foster also a national quality culture.
Thank you, Dr. Lidke. And Ms. Lauder?
So as my colleague just mentioned, we have laid out in the implementation plan some quick wins and some catalytic projects. So the quick wins are activities that can be undertaken in less than a year, because another person on the panel mentioned success breeds success. So if we have these activities that are doable within the first 12 months, and some of them can actually be achieved with some budget funds that are already in place. In my discussion with Mr. Laplace, there are already some activities that their current budget in the various ministries, whether it be tourism, agriculture, or trade, that can start those activities. Because once these things get implemented and then the report back. So you asked the minister about communication, and this program is one of those in terms of communicating the quality policy to the people and constantly updating that communication, so that as these activities get accomplished and you can tick them off the list, you report back to the people so they can see something is happening and that they can continue to give support, and that the program will then, by its own momentum, keep going. And then the longer term projects, which are doable beyond a year, those also can be started within this year, and then they will continue, and they definitely should be captured in the budget for next year. So our team have already recommended that some of those activities that are not yet budgeted for, put those in late this year when you make up the budget for next year, so that they can get captured. And then some of the bigger chunk, you could then approach donor funding to get those rolled out. So there are a number of steps that can be followed towards the implementation, and that dynamism will help to give life to the document. And as I mentioned, constantly communicating with the public, whether by the Facebook pages of the Bureau, the website of the Bureau, the Ministry of International Trade, your own media, and we thank you very much for the exposure today. All of these avenues can communicate the policy and its implementation, so the people of St. Kitts and Nevis can share in the wins and the success as this rolls out and moves forward.
We are basically out of time, so I would ask the two persons here, the director of the Bureau of Standards and the minister responsible for the Bureau of Standards, to give their parting remarks.
Let's go first.
Okay, and thank you for having us, Lefroy. We had quite an engaging discussion here. One of the first steps we're going to do as the National Quality Council is to look at the legislation across the various sectors to see what needs updating, what is good to move forward, etc. So the various representatives from that council would be tasked with that responsibility to look at what they have to make sure that it is in line to where we need to go. So I'd like to thank you once again for inviting us to this final, I wouldn't want to say culmination to the NQP, but it's a start from that end, continuing on to the implementation. We will be doing our own media campaign as well in terms of updating the public. We're going to put out an infomercial by the name of Up to Standard, so you will be getting some regular updates as it relates to what we're doing and where we're going as a whole. So again, thank you once again.
Okay.
Minister Phipps?
Yes, Leslie, thank you. And I'm going to finish where Mr. Laplace ended, and that is to join him in thanking yourself, ZIZ, etc., for giving us this opportunity to hear some of these matters. We recognize that some of what we said today might be first-time information for a lot of persons, but then that is what we expected, and we wanted to start a national conversation that then gets people turned on to what it is we are trying to achieve if we intend to change a culture for the better, where quality infrastructure is concerned and quality standards. At the same time, the Ministry of Trade is committed to do our own ongoing in-house improvements in terms of the staff outlay when it comes to the Bureau, because Mr. Laplace, to be able to achieve what they which is a broader mandate now, would need to have not just the more appropriate staff, but the widening of scope and knowledge of the existing cadre of staff that we now have. We have to have some amount of capitalization built in terms of equipment, for technology, for testing, etc. And I have to say, this type of equipment is not cheap. One microscope could cost $250,000 US, but it's a commitment that we've given nevertheless. And then we also will be looking at the legislative infrastructure. For example, persons in the general audience may recall that we would have had a first reading to the replacement consumer protection bill last year, August. That bill hopefully will be having its second and third reading within the second quarter of this year. And we would be looking forward to that to replace the existing 2003 Act, so that the public is more educated and more empowered in terms of their rights when it comes to the sale and purchase and so forth, and the recourse and redress for dissatisfaction when it comes to selling goods and services in St. Kitts and Nevis. I also would like to indicate that the quality infrastructure we are trying to propose falls quite in line with the government's own thrust at the economic restructuring and recovery plan that is being led by the Ministry of Finance with support from the consulting firm Deloitte. Deloitte, through consultation with the public and private sector over the past year, would have reduced the key sectors down to manufacturing, tourism and the allied services sectors, agriculture and fisheries, as well as ICTs. And that dovetails precisely in what we are trying to achieve here. So I think we have the extra support from other agencies and other initiatives that will give us the impetus that we need to deliver on the promises that we would have made and the commitments given in terms of the development of the national quality policy and culture for St. Kitts and Nevis.
Right, thank you so much. So I want to thank Mr. Omar, Mr. Derek Omar, who is the CEO of CROSQ, Dr. Ulrich Lidke, I think I got it right. Thank you so much. He's an economist and consultant. And Ms. Julianne Lauder, the manager and owner of JAL Training and Consultancy Services. Thank you so much for coming and sharing with us today on such an important topic, developing a national quality policy. Our people deserve the best. We deserve the best in terms of goods and services, and we must not be shortchanged. So thank you so much. I want to thank the Honorable Minister, Wendy Phipps, and the Honorable Director of the Bureau of Standards, Mr. Stuart Laplace. Thanks to all of you for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You have been listening to another edition of Working for You. Next week we will be back with another Working for You program. Until then, from all of us, I am Les Roy Williams. Take good care.